welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are live and on time. We are live and on time. I'm your host, Shon Black, and Mac, and this is the Shon Black Podcast, where regular talk happens. The talk is regular, okay? We do regular things over here. We do regular talk, everyday talk. Now, I will say that we are going to do ear itches. I think what we're going to do today is we just going to talk about some cultural shifts because the culture is changing. People are changing, the culture is changing, and I want to know from you if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mm, I want to say that the culture changing for me is bittersweet, right? Because on the one hand, the cultural, our culture, the culture that I grew up in was very rules oriented. You're you grew up under a certain set of rules that were for everybody, right? Nobody really had there wasn't too many people that had different rules. Most of us all had the same rules. Even though we were from, and that's crazy, even though we were from different, we might have been from different cultures, we all kind of had the same rules. You didn't go, you didn't leave the house. If you left the house, you came back home, the street lights was on, you knew that you needed to be home before the street lights came on. You know what I mean? That was everybody knew that when the street lights came on, that they needed to be in the crib. Everybody knew that. There wasn't no there there was just things in the culture that you did when you were a kid that today, even though you try to hold true to those things, there's a lot of things that happen culturally that most people just they're not. You don't see that in the culture anymore, and not only that, but the culture is getting a little. It's more a me centered culture. We don't have like you know people back in the day. They used to take care of their neighbors. They used to take care of their friends. They used to take care of each other. If each other were, if we were, let's say I was, a young kid and I was somewhere and somebody's parents saw you doing something that was crazy, son, you would get in trouble by that parent. Then that parent would go to your daggone house and tell your parent and you got in trouble again. And then your father would come home and there would be a whole nother set of consequences to pay. Discipline was a thing. Today, that's not a part of our culture. Now there are still like me. I am an old school parent, so but we don't allow our kids to play outside because we're fearful that they might get snatched. Where it was more likely that you probably could have got snatched. Now I won't lie. That is a little bit more dangerous, as for children. But we've we culturally we don't teach our kids anything like that. Now, and I'm not talking about, well, you're from a different culture. We're just strictly talking about what is American culture and how has it changed. It's not political. It's just what did you do back in the day that people are not doing today culturally. You know, it just seems to me like there was a lot of things that were going on culturally back in the day that it's just not happening today, bro. It's just not. And there's a lot of instances you can point to, but culturally, there's a lot of things that just aren't going down. I mean, kids, for one, they don't do the kind of things that we used to do back in the day. I don't know if that's a culture thing. It's just, you know, We just don't do it as American culture. You don't do it. Here's something. And when we were kids, we used to ride in the back of pickup trucks. Riding in the back of a pickup truck to me was like American culture, right? You had a friend that had a pickup truck, everybody and their mom got inside of it. You know what I mean? Your friend's dad, you all didn't just pile up inside of the cabin. He was like, get in the back. And everybody sat down in the pickup truck, and you were at lights, and you rolled down. You got rides. If somebody wanted to ride, they had a pickup truck. You got in the back. To me, that's like American culture. Now that, I mean, people can argue against that, you know what I mean? But you don't see that anymore. There's nobody doing that anymore. Ain't nobody getting in the back of your pickup truck anymore. That's not going to happen. You going to jail. You going to jail. You know. Uh, and it's just a lot of like things that you did as kids and as a young adult that just isn't acceptable today. I mean, and there's a shift, in my opinion, culturally. We're just not. It's just not the same anymore. It's not a good thing or it's a bad thing. It's just something that I noticed. So I thought today on the show that we would talk about the cultural changes in America. You know what I mean? I thought that that would be something cool to talk about for the day, and how that affects you as a person, how that affects you as an individual. How does that affect you? How do you see yourself culturally? Is it the same as you were when you were a kid? Do you try to hang on to the things that you grew up on culturally, or is that something that you don't care to care to look at or to talk about? You know what I mean? It doesn't matter to you. You might be like, well, look, I think you're putting too much on culture. You might think, man, that's just a crock of crap. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? But I don't know. In my opinion, I think it matters. I think culture is important. You have to have culture. I think without culture, uh, it gets bland. Like, for example, where I live at, there's no food culture. Everything is a fast food restaurant. People know that that's not what American culture was at. You very rarely ate in a restaurant back in the day. Very rarely. Like when you were a kid, you didn't eat at a restaurant. You didn't go to McDonald's. You didn't go to Burger King. You didn't do those things. Like people didn't do that thing. But culturally, you know what you did? You went to other people's homes. I know at my house, my mom and them, we always had people at the crib. Always. Always. Everybody, some people were always at my house. There was times when you go to people's house, they would offer you something to eat, they would offer you something to drink. People kept uh cakes, and they baked cakes, and they kept them in those, the thing with the dome, the glass thing with the dome on it, and you had cookies, and they had drinks, cold drinks. And so when you came over to somebody's house, you stopped in and you checked on them. You said, hey, you know what I mean? I was in the neighborhood and I stopped in, and they talked and they offered them cake. And you don't, culturally, that was culture, son. Like people did that. Today, you don't have that. There's none of that. There's no visiting with the neighbor. There's no talking with the neighbor, talking with the people in your neighborhood, knowing the people in your neighborhood. The culture, that culture is gone. People say, well, they might say, well, sure, you know what? That isn't a culture. That isn't anything that's culture. But man, I beg to differ, man. I think that is culture, bro. I think that a lot of it, uh, just something as simple as that is just gone from the thing. The only culture is American culture, monster trucks, beers, thick women. guns, rock and roll, and Disney. Shout out to the General. He is in the chat. What's up, General? But yeah, listen, man. Um, I I kind of agree with the monster trucks and the guns and the rock and roll. I don't know about beer and thick women. This dude is wild. But yeah, man. I look culturally, people just don't do. And give me something if you would in the chat on a serious note. Like think of something culturally that people that you used to do with as a kid that you don't do anymore. Like it's just disappearing. It's dying out. He said, "Eating my American-made burger, king chicken sandwich." Yo, look, man. I'm telling you, we as American citizens, I think that it's just evaporating. And no, you can give whatever reason you want to give why that is. I personally think that we just don't teach it. I think nothing can be taken from you. I think something has to be you just eliminate it yourself. And I honestly believe that people just don't think about how it affects them or their, going through with your ancestors 2 generations back recognize your culture, your family today. And we're just talking about like how you keep traditions and stuff like that. I don't think people be like, what the heck is going on? Like, what is this? You don't eat the same foods. You don't talk the same way. You don't, you know, it has nothing to do with how you dress and what you believe. Politically, it's just Saturday mornings. It's another cultural thing that I thought that everybody did. Like, you know what I mean? Well, for me, church. Yeah, church. A lot of people, the Sunday church after dinner, Sunday dinners with family. Um, that's culturally, that's what America was like. Some people got up, they went to church, and even if you didn't go to church, you sent your kids to church. No, there was a bus that came and picked up the children and took them to church, and kids went to Sunday school. Like that was a thing culturally. That was an American thing that rarely happens anymore. I want to say it's culture disappearing, but letting it be replaced with fabricated culture that doesn't work anywhere in the world. Yeah, true. I believe that our culturally people just do not understand what is happening. Um, I don't think they think it's important, so they just don't do it. That's my personal opinion. If my daughter, the general again said, if my daughter at the dinner talking about OF, I failed her as a father. Somebody getting slapped, sorry. That's right. I mean, think about that culturally. Culturally, we were a more I don't want to say conservative because that sounds like a political term, but the way that we were as a culture, we were more conservative as a culture. Like culturally, you can have your ideas back and forth, but culturally, you were more conservative culturally. Like, here's something. I was looking at um TikTok, and there was people dressed like they dress in vintage wear from like the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and the dress culturally was more conservative. Men wore suits, women wore dresses. They looked more feminine. Their hair was more feminine. The way that they moved was a little bit more feminine, but that was culture. Like culturally, that's how they did it because the world, and now today we are a very loose and relaxed society. We don't do that culturally anymore. We don't have people who just wear those kind of those outfits where you're dressed down every day. People don't do that. Is that hurting us as an American country? Like, and like, again, it's not political. It's just culturally. Are we not looking at what things should be? He said, Japan, here I come. Well, think about, okay, great. I love it. Japan, right? Though they don't wear the wares that they used to, they still bow. They still reverence each other in that way. You don't, you know, they're very apologetic in the way that they speak and act. There are certain things culturally that they just don't accept from anybody and everybody. And I for one, I'm like, oh, okay, I feel that. Like that's what's up. That's what's up. You know, um, Japanese culture is very, 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 like, it's conservative in a way. They still keep the traditions of their ancestors from way back. Like, we don't keep any of that as Americans. Like, I feel like we used to. I think you could learn so much from the things that your parents did back in the day. And today you don't learn as much from your parents back in the day. You just hear stories, but you don't act on all of the stuff that they did, which is part of your culture. You know what I'm saying? Like, I it's like we lose it because we're losing an identity. I said, I think our kids do. I think our kids act like us in a certain way, but culturally, do we culturally bring them up in a way that's like, you know, uh we don't bring them up in a traditional Spanish culture. We don't bring them up in a traditional American culture. Not one from like 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. We don't bring them up like that. And, like, whereas again, the Japanese, they bow. They culturally they bow and they show humility. Whereas in American culture is very loose. We're a very loose society now. Even and I would say that it changed back in I would say it kind of changed back in I want to say it kind of changed back in the day. It's not as it was. I don't think it's as it was what it was or is now. I think that the 60s changed a lot of things. In the 50s, 40s, 30s, I think people were still trying to rebuild their identity. And when the 60s came, it kind of just turned our country this way. And people started throwing off traditions, they started throwing off cultural norms, and then went for, it's whatever I want to do. I think that's cool, and then people started adopting that. And so now, as you look toward, what's going on culturally, man, we messed up in the game, bro. We are super messed up in the game. I think a lot of it has to do with we just don't look at things. I mean, you look at, today, um we have no in here in VA where I live at, there are no, like, people say, "Oh, son, we have culture, it's soul food." No, I'm talking about, man, America used to be like craftsmen, people that were real craftsmen, people that took pride in what they did. And look at houses, the way that they're built now versus then. People say, well, technology was different. You know what I mean? Okay, you have better tools, right? But the way that they built things was to last. Nothing lasts anymore. Like because culturally it just isn't the thing to do. Said LSD, spitting on troops, open relationships, communism, hippies. It's too the general, we are outsourced to China. Exactly. That's what I mean. Like, we don't build or make anything anymore. We just kind of like our society is super relaxed. Before you had like you got people that teach their kids how to build cars, and whatnot, right? But I'm talking about like, remember when back in those days you had great grandpa that was outside, and great grandpa was a you know he did horses, and so he taught his kids who taught their kids, and they were horses. They taught them about horses and how to take care of horses, and that was their culture, bro. We people just don't do that anymore. Is it just me, or am I just bugging? I might be just bugging. You might just be like, "Yo, something like you bugging today." Said the breakup of the American family, but yeah, I think that's part of it, but not. I think people just don't care about that kind of stuff anymore. Everything is of straightforward. Like, I'm going to work, I'm coming home, that's it. There's no time or no place for anything else. We don't share in it, and then so people try to build their family, what they call family time, right? They'll say, well, we got to spend time as a family, but what are you doing as a family that culturally helps build a culture around like what you are, that gives you an identity as a family? Dads used to teach their kids, though. Yeah, they did. They used to teach them. They used to teach them what they learned as children, right? What did you learn as a kid? Like, there's people who hunt, right? Like the guy that I used to work for, he's hunting, right? He's passionate. His dad and his mom hunted, and so he hunted. He taught his kids how to hunt. He's actively teaching his grandson how to hunt. And that's their culture. Like, son, they're building around the culture that was passed down, is being passed down from generation to generation. Like, I can't point to something that was passed down to me that my grandfather did, that his father did, that his father did. And that in tune was like, around you was the culture of that, because people learn that. People from the neighborhoods, they learn that. Like, son, there was neighborhood culture. There was family culture. There was job culture. Like, son, there's no culture anymore, and it's changing. Like, you could see now that it's very little. Like, you don't have people that talk about, well, my great great grandfather did that, and now my great great grandfather does. Usually that's reserved for people who are on farms that farm animals, and like I said, or they have lots of land, and those people are still people who have culture in a certain way. Also understand, okay, let me see what the general is saying over here. I gotta fix this where we can see what the general is saying. He said, now you're not bugging. I understand times change, but still also understand pride goeth before the fall, but at the same time feel like people have no pride in what they do or what they can do. That's true. That's true. That is absolutely 100% what I'm talking about. VA is the land of the hater culture. That's right. That's passed down. That's right. VA. I've always said that Virginia is the land of the hater. I mean, it'll. If you're not careful, you'll learn how to be a hater. It's crazy. No, but no, the general is absolutely 100% right, and so is the fly Puerto Rican. It is. There's no pride in what people do anymore. There's no pride in keeping things. There's no pride in doing things. Everything is about a dollar. Nothing is about building your family or building your community, building like we saw a guy coming the other day. We saw a guy was outside on like in his neighborhood, but he was like near the main road. So and he's picking up trash, right? 70, 80 years ago that could never happen because nobody would ever even thought about putting trash on the ground like that. Like you walk, things were pristine. People had a different mindset about how they lived and what it was about to be, you know what I'm saying, in this great American culture. What they talked about was different. The way they moved was different. Everything was different. Men were men and ladies were ladies, and people like they gravitated towards being that the best possible versions of themselves that they could be. Today we just don't have that, or like people are not particularly crazy about being who they are as people. They're not crazy about being that person that is or is not, you know, like just being a great human. Son, and people aren't about that. It's very well, you know, if you don't agree with what I have to say, then you're just a terrible human being. And like, come on, man. America is a melting pot of people that somehow in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s were able to bring it together and build humongous buildings and large leaps in technology, win world wars and whatnot. And then all of a sudden the breakdown is happening. Can we not see um how that is? Like there was a sense of pride and now there is no pride. There's no feeling of I am this person, hear me roar. There's none of that. There's none of that. None of that is possible anymore. It seems like we can't have it. It's not possible. There's no sense of God. There's no sense of community. There's no sense of culture. There's no sense of even the food culture is terrible. People don't cook because they're bringing that. Back in the day, man, there was a. People don't do that anymore. Like you had a grandmother who taught their kid who taught their kid. That stuff was passed down. You ask half people, they say, "Oh yeah, they're making dishes from other people's countries," and I'm one of them. I'm one of them. I'm not in here making great American dishes. I'm one of them. I make Oriental food. Can I say the word Oriental? I can say the word Oriental. I make Oriental food. You know what I mean? It's just I just think, man, but we haven't really as a society, we haven't really thought about that. What are we doing as a culture? How are we what are we passing on to our kids that they can look at and say, yo, this is part of my culture as my family culture. This is a part of my neighborhood culture. Like, because back in the day, we had neighborhood culture. Good or bad or indifferent. You had neighborhood culture. Now you don't have that. That's not a thing anymore. Being in the neighborhood, in your neighborhood, and sitting out with your family and friends and your neighbors and learning and being a part of one community. That's not a thing anymore. At least you know what I mean. Ah, interesting answer. Said we have given our culture away for diversity. The fly Puerto Rican said. I mean, could be that. Could be that. Could be. Could be that we want to be so diverse that the culture doesn't matter. America had its dark moments, but she's also risen from the bottom stronger than she was. It's funny you say that, General. Um, America is in tune but it must be sung together. That's right. America is a tune, but it must be sung together. Absolutely phenomenal statement. That needs to be on a daggone t-shirt or a hat. America is a tune. It must be sung together. That's phenomenal, man. Um, I think you're 100% right. I think there's a lot to be said about culture and togetherness. I think even though you fought amongst each other, you knew that at certain point that we come together and do some amazing things. And I was telling them at my job, a lot of them are from different countries, and I said, we as American citizens understand things that most countries in the world don't understand. We understand that the world is a brutal place, but we will confront brutality if it's brought to our shores, because we might fight each other, but we stand together in one common goal, and that's to defeat the enemy. We did that in the French. We did that to the Germans. We did that to the English. We did that to the Spanish down in Mexico. And that's what we've always done. We've always stood together when it came time. We might not have liked you, but we'd fight shoulder to shoulder, right? And I think that's what it's missing. I think that today it feels like if that was to be something that happens today, if we had to defend ourselves today, would that happen? Would we stand shoulder to shoulder like we would have done 100 years ago or 120 years ago? I don't know. And I'm just asking these questions. I feel the shift. I don't think that the culture in America is what it used to be. Um, I don't think that we're singing that when that American tune isn't being sung together like the general said. I don't think that I don't even know if we're even capable of singing that tune anymore because we've lost so much of what we used to be. And I don't know. I don't know. Just questions, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not trying to get deep or anything, but I mean those are things that, like I said, these are regular things that regular things around the water cooler, man. Regular things around the water cooler. I want to be able to talk that culture talk. And then me, as a person that moved around a lot in his life and went to different places and seen a lot of different things and um talked to a lot of different people and been around a different cultures. You go to Germany. German is unapologetically German. France is unapologetically French, and so on and so forth. But America, man, it was something special. When you used to go overseas, bro, like, son, you was American, that was a big deal. And if people look at you, you'd be like, son, that dude's an American. You could tell that just your swagger was different. Today, we don't want to be what we always were. Like, we were a great force, bro. I mean, son, as a young adult, bro, living overseas, man, son, you walk around with your shoulders back. American, you talking about American? You what? Do I look like I'm from someplace else? You better put some respect on that. And that was a fact, bro. That was a fact. People really. But we've allowed. I think you're right. We've allowed our culture to be controlled by individuals that don't have our best interests in mind, that want to collapse what it is to be an American and then cheapen or soften that by saying that the culture doesn't matter. And You can tell, you can feel it. Christmas doesn't feel like Christmas. You know, culturally, that was a thing. What Christmas used to feel like Christmas back in the day. Every place was lit up. Stores had jingles in it. Lights all over the place. It felt like Christmas, bro. And now it don't feel like nothing. You people are around talking about happy holiday. How was your holiday? Do I look British? How was my holiday? New Year's was New Year. Like there was an excitement over New Year's. There was an excitement over Thanksgiving. There was an excitement over, you know what I'm saying, 4th of July. There was an excitement. It felt almost magical to be as in your cultural, wherever you did culturally for those holidays, that you blended that in and made it like it was like you were a part of something. Now it doesn't feel like anything. Dudes are just getting together to throw something on the grill and that was it. So we the people got lazy and scared of being called intolerant. It might be. It might be. You know. You know, if I had to throw something like that in there, I would say we just didn't require people to assimilate into our culture. We allowed them to have their own culture. Even though, like, and then people would rebut that and say, well, you know, people came here from all over the place. Well, that's true, but they still wanted to be us. They wanted to still be us. They didn't want to keep their identity of who they were. Yes, they were Italians. Yes, they were Germans. Yes, they were Yugoslavians. Yes, but they came to turn themselves into Americans. That was one thing because America had something that was special back then. It was special. Everybody in the world wanted it. Now, today, they don't want that. They're like, I'm just here to get the bread, dog. That's not the culture. They reject the culture. People reject the culture and you can feel it. You can feel it. It's in the air. You feel it. You know. I don't know, man. For me, um I think that we just left out a lot of things. You know, and I know people won't agree. There's a lot of people who don't agree, and that's cool. But look around. Is your culture the way it was when you were 10? When you were 15? And I'm talking about older cats like myself in your 50s, in your late 40s. How was the culture, or even older than that, if you're in your 60s and your 70s, you definitely see the culture has shifted. The country has shifted. Things aren't the same. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? How do you feel about it? Are you okay with it? Or are you saying it is just what it is? Then you look back and you say, well, it wasn't much of a shift until the 60s. Before then, it wasn't really it wasn't really a whole big shift culturally. I don't know. I think that we've gotten to the point, like the fly Puerto Rican says, that, you know, we kind of just bottle that stuff up. You know, the tune that must be sung together, as the general suggested, um, said feminism and diversity, lack of God is the issue. Yeah, I don't disagree with any of these statements that are there. I think that the statements are they're perfectly said, well said. I think that, you know, diversity is a problem because the American culture isn't diverse. It's the culture. It just has different people in it, but they all subscribe to one culture. God is good. Yes, He is. The Lord is one that He will humble society if you are trying to remove him from, because he doesn't beg to be, he doesn't beg to be worshipped or praised. He just says, hey, this is what you got to do, and if you don't want to do it, he says, fine, I'll just remove myself from this. And then things start to happen, bro. Like, you like, what the heck just happened? Like, why is all this stuff? Well, this is what you asked for. You asked for me not to be around, so I'm not going to be around. And as the society and the culture fall apart, people can't figure it out. But you're 100% right. You know what I mean? The lack of God is a serious issue, because that is what kind of held people at bay. You know, you were afraid to go past the church. But your music, back in the day, the sound system was everything. But you turn that joint down. You saw a church, you turn that joint down. Funeral came by, you took off your hat. Kind of just sat still. Here's something. So I lived on military bases for most of my life, and I forget what it's called, but in the morning they play a song, and in the evening I think it's taps that they play. Either reveille in the morning, taps in the evening. I think that's what it is. So, and I could be wrong. Correct me, military people out there, if I'm wrong. Um, the problem is that when back in those days when you heard that come on, everybody just stopped. Didn't matter where you were, in the grocery store, on the streets, out playing as kids, you stopped. And if you knew, like, it usually was like a main flagpole. There's a main flagpole in the center of the base, and you always knew what direction that flagpole was at. And wherever you at, when you would hear it, you would stop and you would just stand. Some people would put their hand on their heart. Some people just, and then as soon as it was over, you went back. If you were in the car, you stopped driving. They don't do that anymore. They don't do that anymore. Tass's funeral reveille is morning. Okay. So then what's the one for the evening when they lower the flag? They grew up on a base and we all did it. People did it. They would there was a, but do you understand what I'm saying? The culture, even the military culture is different than it used to be. You know, the military culture was different. It's not the same as it used to be. People would say, well, Black, times change, but son, your culture, times can change, but your culture should never change. There's places in the world where the culture is the same. Their culture stretches back 3, 4, 5,000 years, and they still culturally have that. Now technology has changed. They don't live in stone build. They live in modern buildings. But culturally they still kind of, as a people, they're still culture. The one thing I'll give the Muslims, they're not into this crazy stuff that we're into now. You know what I mean? I'll give them that. The color lower the flag. I didn't know this one. Yeah, they did. They used to do it every day. They would lower the flag and they played, and whatever it was they played, son, everybody stopped. In the morning they played it. Everybody stopped. I don't care where you were at. In the store, you coming out the store and the song plays, son, you just stood there and waited for the whole joint to go through. You didn't dare move. Those of you guys that grew up on the base, or were in the military, that in during those times in the you know before now, that was a thing. Today it's different. Today it is different. I don't know. I know it feels like I'm rambling on, but it's just something that I noticed that we as a people culturally, our cultural, people say our culture is our diversity. You know how people talk, the stuff that they be talking about. Culture is our diversity and all that kind of stuff. And um, I think it is to a certain extent, but I think that your diversity isn't your culture. Culture is your culture. And as a culture, you should be ready to do what it is that you got. Like you should preserve it. I think culturally, you should always preserve what it is that you want to do, and there shouldn't be anything different about that. Well, I'm gonna end it here, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you coming on, listening to the ramblings of a dude named Shon Black, Dawn, and Mac on the Shon Black podcast, where everyday talk happens. I appreciate it. I hope that you all have a wonderful day, wonderful rest of the night. We'll be back here Wednesday, always Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 7:30, and I was on time today. Right on time on 7:30. That's right. That's right. And Jen, I'm gonna give you a holler after the show. I got some questions for you. I got questions, and you'll answer them, won't you? Yeah, you will. Um, Peace, love. Remember, take care of yourselves and others. Also, you know what I mean? Um, Fridays is TV show Fridays. It's officially dubbed the TV show Fridays, where we'll be going through all the TV shows that you watch. So, that being said, I need you to figure out what it is that you're watching and tell Shon Black. All right? You can see we need a message, pew pew. What? We need to, we need a message, pew pew. What the heck are you talking about, man? What is the fly Puerto Rican suggesting on this podcast? I don't know what she's suggesting, but it sounds dangerous. And so, because it sounds like that, we are going to go ahead and stop this programming before we get censored.